All right. Okay. And again, I'm going to keep, it's going to take me a moment to make sure everybody's getting into the room that they.
Do you want me to disable the waiting room?
Yeah, if you could, that would be great. Okay.
It doesn't look like I can, but I will keep an eye on the waiting room.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. So today is our deep dive for cycle 1, and we'll go to the next slide. Again, I'm Zoltan Sard. I see many familiar faces in this group, so it's good to see you all. I am again the lead consultant for the Gen Ed CalTPA. I also do some work on the early childhood development of that TPA as well. And joining me from Evaluation Systems.
Hi guys, my name is Caroline Rafanti. I am a scoring program manager with the evaluations system group of Pearson. We serve as the technical contractor for the CTC. I also will be serving as the technical background host. So if you are sending a chat, try to send it to the group, but if you need to send me a direct message, I will be monitoring that and interrupting Zoltan from time to time. And I think that's, yeah.
Okay.
That's it. Welcome.
There we go. And our next, and actually, before we get started with the agenda, if you could all put your name and your affiliation into the chat as well. Okay. Again, thank you all for joining us. This is our big kickoff for our year 5. Actually, Jack, not to put you on the spot, but I would also like to introduce a new member of our performance assessment team at the CTC. His name is Jack Boss. He's going to be supporting us with a lot of data analysis. So Jack, would you mind unmuting and just saying hello?
Sure. Hello. How are all of you?
It's good. It's going to be really nice to have his expertise in looking at some of the data that we've been working towards, but again, having somebody that's dedicated to that work is going to be really helpful. So thank you, Jack.
Of course.
So if we can go back to the agenda. So we're going to go through the cycle 1 guide, really with an eye to looking towards what the changes are for year 5. We will sort of give a high level overview of each step. We're going to provide the rationale for what those changes are. All the changes really came from a variety of places, really working with our assessors and seeing what they're seeing in submissions, from office hours, from conversations with programs, to really think about how can we support our candidates in being more successful with their CalTPA submissions. And so again, we've added in year 4, we made quite a few changes. In year 5, there's much less substantial changes, but most of the changes were really designed around how can we provide clarity, provide additional information for candidates for them to be more successful. We will do a quick overview of the highlights of the CalTPA program guide. We will review condition codes, and then we will answer questions. And as you have questions come up, actually, why don't we go to the norms page again? If you have a question that you would like to just ask, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, but at other times remain muted so that we can keep down background noise. We'd like you to keep your questions to a general focus about the CalTPA, as opposed to if you have specific questions about your program or specific candidates. We have other resources for getting those questions answered. Again, avoid multitasking during the webinar, and then honor the time of participants and presenters by moderating your questions and comments. And again, if you have a question as we move through, please feel free to put it into the chat or to raise your hand. At the end of each step, I will pause for questions. And those questions can be whatever focus you want them to be, if they're beyond even just what the changes that we're going to be highlighting. Okay. So I think we're going to go into the guide now.
So before we just dive right in, before we just dive right into the guide, I'm going to show you where you can find that. I'm going to put into the chat the location where you can find the materials. And Zoltan has a password for you. When you follow that link, you're going to scroll down to assessment materials. And download whichever documents are necessary. I believe you have to put a password in after the zip file is downloaded.
Yes. And the password is in the chat currently. Excellent.
Thank you. I've gotten a couple messages already about needing to leave early or when this video and slides will be available. Zoltan, do you know how quickly after these sessions they become available on YouTube?
We should have them in by the end of the week.
Nice.
I think this one will be fairly simple to upload.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, feel free to send me a message if you had any trouble getting access to these documents, but we'll go to the program guide from here. Does that sound good?
Yeah, and we're going to follow the program guide. There on those assessment materials, the templates are also there, and the whatever changes we see in the guide are also reflected in the templates for the candidates.
All right, sorry.
Quick question, Stephanie. We are focusing on cycle 1 today, and Friday it's cycle 2. Thank you, Caroline.
Okay.
Okay, and if you can make your screen a little bit bigger.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. The key here on this first page is really working with candidates to make sure that they're using version 5. If they submit on version 4 or even earlier, it will still be scored. The main difference here for version 5 is that there have been some changes to the guide and templates that again are intended to support candidates. So they might be missing something important if they don't use the version 5. So we encourage them, and if they've already completed a lot of it on version 4, I would say 95% of it or 98% of it is just a cut and paste over to version 5, but they will see a couple of additional prompts for them. And actually my fan just started. I'm going to turn it off. I'll be right back. Don't want too much static there. Okay. So this first, and again, these are changes for across the guides in the preamble here. This used to say first language English learners and standard English learners. Across the guides, we have eliminated the requirement of and the term standard English learners in order to align with CDE language. CDE does not use the term standard English learner anymore. And again, this first part is again an acknowledgement of all the different all of the different TPAs that or performance assessments that we are developing. This is early on. I don't see the page number here. Caroline, can you show us the page number? So we're Roman numeral 4.
Yeah.
We're on the web page is the guide. Sorry. Why don't we go back and look at that again?
Yep, it's under assessment materials. And right now what we're going through is the performance assessment guide for cycle 1. I don't know that you need the password for the program guide. But
you do not need that.
Sorry?
Yeah, you don't need it for the program,
Okay.
but you do for the assessment materials.
Okay, great. All right, back to this. Okay.
Okay, there we go. Again, there were not significant changes to cycle 1, so we're going to go through them briefly. But again, this is the overview, which gives, and just to remind you all that the guide is intentionally redundant in a lot of ways. So we give a high-level overview of what they're going to be doing through this cycle, and so the overview provides that sort of snapshot look at it. Yes, the single subject is slightly different. Thank you, David. But the overview gives the rationale of what they're doing, the call out boxes. I will say from one of the, my work with some candidates in office hours, I do really think that calling candidates' attentions to the call out boxes, I think sometimes it's apparent that they have not read those. I actually really think that they have some pretty helpful information. So remembering to call candidates' attention to the call out boxes, I think is really useful. We haven't made any additional changes to the descriptions of UDL. And then again, here's that high level look at what step 1 is. We have added a lot of language here of reminding candidates about citing standards and learning goals. So they have to use the current content standards and curriculum frameworks and the California ELD standards. Those need to be the current versions. We do see candidates at times, you can find the previous versions on the CDE website in sort of the archives, but making sure that they have access to the current versions is really key. We don't want them to get a condition code for wrong standards. Current version, I believe, I'm not sure what the exact year is, maybe 2016, something like that. But if we have in the guide, there is also a link to the ELD standards. Oh, thank you. And before we continue, actually, could I just ask in the chat if you could put into the chat if you are a brand new assessor or coordinator, if this is your first meeting with us or one of your first meetings with us. Just want to see if I can tailor this to everybody's needs. Okay. All right, so I will give a little more detail. It's good.
Nice.
Well, welcome everybody. So going back to the concept of, I mentioned condition codes, and we're going to get into that a little bit later, some detail on the condition codes. It's good to see so many new folks here, and I hope you're also all join us for the new coordinator meeting on Thursday. But the condition codes, when we refer to condition codes, those are when a candidate submits a CalTPA and there is something missing that interferes with us being able to see the evidence that is required for them to submit. The submission is not scored, but what happens is the candidate receives a code that explains to them what is missing. So some of the things, some of the common ones we've seen particularly during pandemic, where we didn't see enough students on the screen, or there was something wrong with the video clip. So if there's something wrong with the video clips, you see that. One of the common ones that we're getting, have been getting, is using appropriate or citing appropriate content and ELD standards and providing learning goals. So you'll see here in the guide that we have expanded our support for candidates in that area. But if they have not used the appropriate standards, whether it be content standards or ELD standards, and the current versions, they will get a condition code where their submission is returned to them, that they can then revise it and resubmit. Do students need to be seen continuously? No. We just need to see for almost all the video clips, and you'll see a little bit later, we also clarify how many students you need to see. We need to see 2 or more, but we only need to see them in some part of the video clip. So the standard English learners we've taken that term out of the guide, out of the assessment guide. So we do not refer to standard English learners anymore in the guide. Thank you, David. Okay. So again, this preamble is outlining what the different steps are. So step 1 was plan, step 2 is teach and assess, step 3 is reflect, step 4 is apply. Okay, so for focus student 3, we've also, and you'll see a little bit more language later. So again, for one of the core parts of cycle 1 is that the candidate plans a single lesson for a group of students, and then they choose 3 focus students. The first one is a student identified as an English learner. Second one is a student who has an IEP 504 or GATE or some other area of need in terms of learning. And then focus student 3 is a student whose life experiences results in a need for additional support. And so you'll see in the next section in step by step, we've really sort of expanded the description of focus student 3 to be a little bit more comprehensive. Okay, consulting. Oh, actually, go back to that. Supervising mentor teacher was changed. We used to say supervising or master teacher, but we've eliminated the term master teacher. Okay. Oh, and again, this does not apply to single subject. If we go back up to that call out box, multiple subjects candidates, they're completing 2 cycles. They have to complete the first one in either literacy or math, and the second one in the opposite of that. So we need to see their performance with both literacy and with math across the 2 cycles. Okay, we just added some clarification around where the content-specific pedagogy comes in, that it's informed by the TPEs and connected to the TPEs. And now, so now we're reaching the section which is the evidence table. And again, this is a part of that intentional redundancy in the guide. So we had the overview, which sort of gave them the high level view of what they're completing. We now have an evidence table, which provides them with a checklist, basically. And so for each step, the step description is on the left column. In the center, it's what the candidate needs to do to complete that step. And in the right-hand column, there are the sources of evidence that go with that step. And so this is important to remember that for step 1 plan, for all the rubrics that are associated with step 1 plan, those 4 pieces of evidence are the only things that the assessors will look at. They won't look at any of the sources of evidence from step 2, teach and assess. They won't look at anything from reflect or apply. And so for candidates to have that understanding that this is any rubric that's related to each step really understand where the assessors are going to look for that source of evidence. And so for step one, they have the written narrative, getting to know their students. For part B, they have a lesson plan. They can use their own lesson plan, or they can use the CTC lesson plan or the CalTPA lesson plan. We recommend that they really do a cross reference if they are using their own to make sure that it's aligned. For part C, they do a written narrative, the rationale for their lesson plan, and in part D is all the related resources and materials that they're going to use for this lesson. So for step two, teach and assess, and we'll get into in the step-by-step a little bit more. They're going to teach that lesson, and they are going to record they're going to record the entire lesson. We actually, again, this is something for us to support our candidates. We really ask them, best practice is for them to record the entire lesson rather than trying to capture a particular clip that might be happening. But they are going to take that entire lesson and chunk it up into 3 different clips of up to 5 minutes. And then they'll also write annotations detailing specific components of the lesson that are required for them to demonstrate. So part E there, the sources of evidence are the video clips and the annotations that they provide. For step 4, reflect, there's the one template for that. If we can go back up a little bit. So again, for this one, so that's part F is the source of evidence. And what they're going to do is they will reflect, think about the plan that they created. They think about what how they developed and accommodated those 3 focus students. Think about then what happened as they taught and assessed, and reflect on both those 2 steps. Part of the, I'm going to say this several times here because we've also highlighted it in the guide. One of the keys here is that they are, for step 3, that they are citing evidence from steps 1 and steps 2. Again, the assessors will not go back to look. And so it's up to the candidate to say, I want the assessor to look at this piece of evidence as a rationale for, or as evidence for what I'm saying in my reflection. And then step 4, they think about the reflection and all that happened, and they think about what their next steps are for learning with this particular group of students and more generally. Again, there's one narrative, the application of what they learned for this. And again, this is that key piece where they need to be citing evidence from steps 1, 2, and or 3 to bring to bear what they want the assessors to be taking note of, because the assessor will not go back. Okay. So now now what I'm going to do is let's go through step 1 plan, and then we'll pause for questions and discussion as we need it. And I've done some highlighting here of what this step 1 is about. But again, they're going to choose one class of students to design an asset-based lesson for. We have a call-out box here that we've made it a little bit more clear that candidates and students must be visible and conversations must be audible in the video recordings. Now, we're not going to be sticklers if you can't understand everything. The assessors really do a good job of listening carefully to the submissions and making sure that we've got the evidence that they need, and the candidates have provided that. But we do want to make sure that we see and hear what's happening and to make sense of what's happening in the teaching and assessing. So again, the first step is they get to know their students. They talk with their supervising and mentor teacher. They think about the past work that the students have done, past learning that they've done. They look at all these sources of evidence about where the students are. You can go down, and then for multiple subjects, again, they choose either literacy or math. There's advice here about how to gather information about particular students in a professional manner and how to record that. so that we're protecting children's privacy. Okay. And then we have this area again. CalTPA is really based on asset-based instruction. So bringing in, really looking at the description of students' assets and learning needs, and what their backgrounds are, what their English proficiencies are, the funds of knowledge, what they bring to the class from their home lives and hot lives outside of school. And then what are those experiences and interests related to the content that they're going to be teaching? Question about the length of the video. The assessors stop watching at 5 minutes. They also, on the narratives, they also stop reading at the page limit. So really encourage candidates to get that evidence in within that 5 minutes. How do students address ELD goals, strategies when they're teaching in Spanish? So there are in a bilingual setting, candidates are still required to attend to students' English language development. In the program guide, we have some information about how to do that, including using strategies from translanguaging. I think that that's a really useful resource. We can highlight that when we get into the guide a little bit later. And again, yes, David, ELD is not, so that's the one difference. The reason that the world languages is a single subject, but it has its own guide because there is not that ELD requirement. Okay. So,
Thank you, Gay. Gay is here.
Hi, Gay, good to see you. Yeah, so they won't watch that last 7 seconds. So then we provide the contextual information for the class, so the grade level, number of students, the content area, what that setting looks like. They outline the resources and materials they're planning. Again, the number of students and the number of students with IEPs, 504s, GATE plans, number of students who are English learners, if it's a dual language setting. So we're getting a really comprehensive view of what the class setting is, what the context is there. So now they choose the 3 focus students. And again, here's the language about protecting privacy of the 3 students. So we are going to then focus on focus student 1, who is a district identified English learner. And there's language here about how to identify that student. If there are no formally identified English learners in the class, candidates can choose a student for whom English language development is a need, is an area of growth. So they have that open ability to do that. They have some prompts here, and again, these prompts are all reproduced in the templates. So they just follow these prompts in the templates. So we're looking at the focus students one's current proficiency in reading, writing, and listening and speaking. What's their prior academic knowledge, their social identity, the cultural and linguistic resources and funds of knowledge. How are they bringing their home language into their planning? And then thinking again about what are their prior interests and experiences, and then the social emotional developmental considerations. And then naming what those ELD goals are for focus student 1. For focus student 2, we choose a student, again, who has an IEP, 504 GATE plan, or again, if they don't have any students who have a formal plan, they can choose a student for whom learning is a concern that needs some extra support. And a lot of the questions are the same. First of all, what is the particular area of need? Again, that prior academic knowledge, the social identity, the cultural and linguistic resources and funds of knowledge. So we're really asking them to go deeply into who that each of these focus students are. We move to the next one. And I'm going to give you a moment to read this highlighted portion. So almost all the language in that highlighted portion was added. It was added in order to align with the Ed Specialist CalTPA, but it was also, that was highly informed by our bias review committee. So I'm going to give you a moment to just read the description of Focus Student 3. And Caroline, do you have that the link to the guides webpage? Could you put that in the chat?
Definitely.
I will put the password, and it's under assessment materials. Okay, so we really sort of expanded the focus of who Focus Student 3 might be. So again, they have the candidates have the prompts around their life experiences inside or out of school that may have contributed to this, them being identified, the prior academic knowledge, the social identity. And if we move down a little bit, thank you, Caroline. And again, prior experiences, cultural and linguistic backgrounds and funds of knowledge, and the developmental considerations. And then if we move down a little bit more. Okay, so now they've come to, we have the context for learning who their students are and who their 3 focus students are. And now they develop their lesson plan. Again, they can use their district or program lesson plan, but really encourage them to make sure that they align it to the CalTPA lesson plan. That's highlighted here. We saw a lot of candidates either getting condition codes or lower scores because they were using lesson plans that didn't have some of the components that were required in it. Again, we have highlighted the bullet points here below under number 1. This was a point of clarity. That was all in the previous guides. That was all in sort of a paragraph form. So where possible, we've broken up information into bullet form. So it's a little bit easier for candidates to just do that check off there. So these are, they need to include the content standards and frameworks, learning goals, ELD standards, and ELD learning goals. Again, here's another box that calls out that they need to use the current content standards and ELD standards. For in the multiple subjects, there is for transitional kindergarten candidates that they have to use the California State kindergarten standards for ELA or math, and they can also use the transitional kindergarten implementation guides. They do not use California Preschool Learning Foundations as TK is considered K-12. We want them to make sure that they're writing out the content and ELD standards and not just refer to the number. Again, we always encourage candidates to really, provide something for assessors that really walks them through it so that they don't have to hunt for what the candidate is intending. Okay, this next section here, we've provided some support in terms of creating a model for what a citation of ELD standards look like. So we have the chapter from the document that they should be using. They should be using those California ELD standards. It should be from chapter 3. It has the different parts of the citation that they need to include, which is part number 1, 2, or 3. They need to include the letter and the name of the heading and the standard number, as well as writing the standard. And we advise candidates to just go ahead and copy that directly, cut and paste that directly from the document. So we have an example of citation from a third grade ELD standard here that reflects those required components mentioned above. From that, we also added an example learning goal based on that particular ELD standard. So we have 2 learning goals related to that standard. So we're using this as a model for candidates. We know there will be some variation in what they submit, but we want them to be able to see that this is really what they need to include. Again, below that, they have the content of the lesson. And again, that information was in year 4. We've just broken it out into bullet form, so it's a little bit more accessible. The highlighted version here on how will they structure student learning activities, we've added just some additional examples here. They also talk about how they will group the students, what the informal assessments are, as we can move down. So again, cycle 2 has the formal assessments and student self-assessment. Cycle 1 is just informal assessments. And then what's your plan for for how you're going to teach this lesson? What are your instructional strategies? What are those resources, materials? And then what adaptations and modifications you might be using. And then the next piece, the lesson plan rationale. To me, I think this is really the heart of intentional lesson planning. It's like, what are you going to teach and why does that make sense for this particular group of students? So remember, they did the context for learning and they named who their students were and their backgrounds, their assets, linguistic and cultural resources. So why does the lesson they plan make sense for this group of students? And that's what this section is all about. So again, they're going to outline what the prior academic content knowledge is, what those assets and learning needs are, the student learning activities, what they're going to do. And again, this gets, I'm going to just name, sometimes people say that this is a little bit repetitive, but here we're actually asking them to name this again because it's the why are you doing these things, not what are you doing. Earlier it was what. And again, those instructional strategies and why those ones make sense for this particular group of students. Let's scroll down a bit more. We also talk about student grouping. What's your intention around that and why? The academic language development, what those resources, materials they're using, what's their informal assessment, and then thinking about the developmental considerations of the focus students and of the class as a whole. And then really thinking about what those the assets and learning needs of the focus students are. The last piece is they provide those related instructional resources and materials. And down below, again, this is that key piece. We want them to see that these are the sources of evidence that the assessor will look at for the step 1 rubrics. So with that, we've had some good questions coming in to the chat. Before we go on to teach and assess, why don't we pause here for a moment and see if there are some other questions coming up. And Caroline can scroll to a particular part of step 1 if we need.
There was a question way at the beginning that I wanted to come back to. The question was, the social science standards are very old, but there is a newer framework. Can social science use either the old standards or new framework?
I'm going to defer an answer to that one because I want to make sure I'm accurate for you. But if you have that question, I'm going to put my email in the chat. Sometimes I still want to just dot my I's and cross my T's to make sure I'm giving you the right information. So if you will if you have that question, if you'll reach out to me with that, I can figure that out. So anybody who has that question, if you'll just email me, that'd be great. If a candidate plans to use a computer program or app, would you like a 1-paragraph description of that? Yes, anything in the resources and materials, anything that gives a little picture of what the candidate is using. Again, is pointing the way for the assessors to understand what the candidate is doing, what they're intending. So I just got a message from Gay, but I'll look at that particular one, but it says if they are state approved and current, there should be no problem using either set. So that's the key. So other questions, if you want to raise your hand as well. You want to just unmute and call out your question? Okay. What parts of submissions can world languages use the target language for? Can they use target language throughout? Yes. So Elisa, you're looking for the lesson plan. So the lesson plan is basically the prompts that we went through here. But if you go into that file on the CTC website that provides the assessment materials, you will see a template for the lesson plan. And you can open that up. It is very reflective. You'll see it's very reflective of the prompts we saw in the guides. So for world language, they can use target language throughout. Okay. Good questions, everybody. Thank you. All right, so let's move on to the teach and assess. If you have questions that occur to you about step 1 plan, feel free to float those out there as well.
Really quick, if you guys had, you were interested in knowing the answer about the social science frameworks question, go ahead and send me a direct message with your email and I will pool those together and I'll touch base with Zoltan after this.
And David put in the link to the current standards and frameworks, which includes all of them. So if you go to that, if they're listed as a link on that page, they will be current versions. Is there a time limit for using recorded video of students from a previous class? So if they maybe recorded last year, say, I think that's what you're asking. There's no requirements for that. I think the one thing I would caution a candidate on is to really look at what the requirements were for the CalTPA when they recorded and when they planned that lesson and recorded it, to make sure that they have everything within that plan and within those video clips that they need for evidence. Particularly last year, there were some significant changes from years before, but we don't have a time limit on that. Okay, so here they're going to select and annotate video clips. Again, they're going to create 3 up to 5-minute video clips and not over, as Gay reminded us. Thank you, Gay. Again, we really do encourage programs to support candidates in understanding. Just turn on their camera and record everything. I've often likened it to a documentary filmmaker. You know, a documentary filmmaker films hundreds and hundreds of hours of footage, and then they weave together the parts they want to tell a story. That's exactly what a candidate is doing here. They're telling the story of how this lesson was planned and how it's going. And really we do have candidates sometimes coming into office hours, and it's clear that they are trying to set up a camera and capture the students doing a particular thing. Let's see, I'm getting My computer has been a little bit off. Okay, I'll get a little bit closer. Is that, let me know if that's a little bit better.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Just making sure there's nothing around my computer. Okay. So we really want to make sure it's really helpful, or actually what I was saying is we see candidates come in and they've tried to set up their cameras to capture the students doing something that, you know, with them and their teaching. And that's really difficult to do because number one, students aren't that predictable. Number two, it's not really authentic teaching, which is what we really want to see. So really getting them in the habit of just setting that camera up. We got advice. We had a diving deeper or digging deep webinar last year where people talked about just getting candidates set up cameras in the room all the time so everybody becomes sort of used to them. It's really a helpful approach, I think, for candidates and for students. So for video clip 1, they are going to choose a portion of their lesson that they recorded where they demonstrate that they are creating a positive and safe learning environment for the students. They're also going to demonstrate where they connect to prior learning and where they're establishing expectations for content-specific learning. And this is, again, no more than 5 minutes. I will say, we say that this is what we want in video clip 1, but assessors know that if they see evidence of that in video clips 2 or 3, they're still going to count it as evidence. We try to ask candidates to put them into specific video clips just for organization and for clarity a little bit, but the assessors will look for evidence across all of them. So again, they select a portion of the lesson where they did those things, established that positive learning environment, explain to the students the connections between the prior content-specific learning and the content of this lesson. I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit in a moment, and that they establish learning expectations. We see a lot of candidates on the second bullet point here, connecting to prior content-specific learning, where they get a lower score on this one, a 2 or even a 1, because they either don't mention prior learning, that would be a 1, or if they refer to a prior activity, but not content specific learning. So if they said, you know, yesterday we did a lesson, or yesterday we went and started our lesson, or started this concept, but they're not talking specifically about the content learning that happened the day before and how that content learning is going to connect with today's lesson. And it doesn't have to be the day before. It could be, you know, just prior learning. But that's really clear that it needs to be about the content, not about what the sort of the activity that they did. We see a lot of candidates saying this was the activity that they did. And so if they mention that the activity, they will score a 2. If they don't mention anything, it will be a 1. And then we've highlighted at the end of each video clip in the number of students that need to be seen and whether or not the teacher needs to be seen, the candidate needs to be seen and heard as well. Okay. Let's see, I'm going to enable live transcription. That's a good, I hope that helps. Okay. For video clip, let's go to video clip 2. So on this one, it's the students' activities and the teacher's instructional strategies. So this is where the candidate is going to demonstrate a clip that shows a portion of the lesson that shows active engagement in the activities and strategies and informal assessments. And again, sort of that active piece is key here. And higher order thinking. Again, candidates, I think, often will score a 2 here if the students are not really actively engaged and if the work that they're doing is not really higher order thinking. And then, so this is where they're demonstrating those strategies that they're using and the informal assessment that they're using. For this one, we need to see candidate and multiple students, again, 2 or more. engaging in that instruction. For video clip 3, next steps for students' content-specific learning. So again, in this one, we want them to point out where they summarized and informally checked for students' understanding of the learning goals. And then again, as in video clip 1, connecting to prior content learning, we want them to now say, so this is where the content learning of this lesson fits in what we're doing next. Not again, if they say, you know, we're going to keep working on our essay tomorrow. That's talking about an activity, but not about the content, where the content of today's lesson lies in the progression of content that the students are going to be learning. And so again, we need to see the candidate and multiple students here. Again, this is advice on what the video clips need to look like, and that we need to see candidates and students must be visible and conversations must be audible. And now if we go to the next section on annotations, we have provided some more support for candidates in understanding what the annotations are. So again, the annotations, the purpose of the annotation is for them to highlight something that they want the assessor to look at in their submission. So they should really be thinking about what part of the video clip do I want them to see, and why do I want them to see that? How is that demonstrating what I need to be submitting? What we often see is candidates will do an annotation for the entire 5 minutes of the video clip. So they're not necessarily pointing out the specific moment where something happens. It's much more effective for them if they really will highlight the specific moment where something is happening. If we go down a little bit further, again, we're not going to condition code it or get a lower score for the timestamps if they have them for the entire video clip. Some candidates will still do that, but really the idea of how do you choose a moment in time within that 5 minute that you want to highlight for the assessor to take a look at. So Lynn, what is the expectation for when they teach the whole class? Is this the expectation for video clips? Can you maybe unmute?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, well, I'm a supervisor of student teachers. And this year, my students are very reluctant to teach more than 5 or 6 students for 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep encouraging them, but what they say is, we work in small groups all day. And that's what my cooperating teacher wants me to do.
Mm-hmm.
So we do expect them to teach the whole day.
Yes.
I mean, the whole hour, show an hour's lesson, not the whole day. So what do you think?
Well, a small group is fine. If they're working with a small group, that's fine. There's not a requirement necessarily that they show a video clip with an entire class of 20, for example. But so the requirement is that we see 2 or more.
Okay.
I think it's helpful for they do need to have 3 because they need the 3 focus students. And for cycle 2, they also need 3 because they need to show 3 levels of performance. So the minimum number we have to see on a video clip is 2, but the minimum number of students in a group has to be 3 for each cycle.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. And again, we highlight what the annotation titles are below here: creating a positive and safe learning environment, explaining connections to prior learning and establishing expectations for content-specific learning, engaging students in content-specific higher order thinking, monitoring for students' understanding of content, and establishing next steps for students' learning of content. So that they have to use all of those annotations at least once across the 3 video clips. They can use them as many times as they want, but they have to use each of them once. And if they do that, because one of the pieces here is that they have to provide evidence of those 5 concepts or abilities that they're showing. And if they don't have one, they won't have evidence for that. Okay, and again, here's some more. That's just some technical information about the annotations. Okay, why don't we stop? We've had some questions coming in again. I appreciate that. Just pause for a moment on the teach and assess. And thank you, Gay, for the addition. That annotation advice is across all of the TPAs for all the performance assessments. If you prefer to unmute, you can go ahead and raise your hand. You have a question? Okay, and I think we are on track. Why don't we go ahead? Again, as questions come up, just go ahead and put them in the chat. So for step 3, reflect, they have that one reflection on what you learned narrative. So here is really focused on a couple of things. One is in thinking about that planning that they did and really focusing and understanding on what their students' assets and learning needs were, like their cultural and linguistic backgrounds and funds of knowledge, how to getting to know those things, support the students' affirmation and validation of their cultural and linguistic backgrounds, and allow students to access and engage with the literacy or math content. Then they also are asked, how effective was the instructional approach in supporting learning for the entire class? And then how effective was the instructional support for each of the 3 focus students and the English learners in the class? And then that last piece is, as they went through this lesson, did they need to incorporate specific in the moment instructional adaptations to accommodate to student needs? And then that question of why or why not is a key one here. I think sometimes candidates think that they need to provide a perfect lesson. I always tell candidates I've never really seen one. So, and you actually, if something is not perfect, you have some more to reflect on. So it's going to support this last part 3. Again, we've highlighted that they must cite evidence from steps 1 and or 2. If they don't do that, then if there's really no citing of evidence, the rubric for step 3 will be scored as a 1. If they have some basic evidence, some sort of, they made an attempt, but you don't see sort of the intentionality behind the evidence, or it's vague, that will be a 2. Okay, the language teachers only teach. So, a couple of questions from Grace. How do they write the ELD standard and goal? So for those, if they are teaching only in a target language or in Spanish or another language, they are still required to attend to the students' English language development. And again, I mentioned translanguaging as an effective approach, because what it's doing is it's really looking in parallel at what the, say, Spanish language development is, what are the, what developing students' understanding of Spanish language grammar and structure and all that thing, and that kind of thing. And there's also parallels to those in English. So if you're doing a translanguaging approach, you're going to, you can think about what is it about language structure that I want my students to learn, or what is it about vocabulary, and what is the complementary or parallel aspect of language development that might be found in English. That's one way to look at it. In the guide, again, there is some background on translanguaging that I think is actually really helpful. So again, the evidence here for the reflection, step 3 is part F. And again, this is no more than 3 pages. And why don't we go on to the apply, and then we'll pause for questions, because apply is a little bit shorter as well.
Sure. And I do just want to call out, it's 2 o'clock, so we just want to keep a close eye on the time.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So again, this is the application of what they learned. Again, there's one part G that they are going to respond to, or on this one, they can also record up to 5-minute video clip of themselves, just reflecting on their next steps for learning. So this is a place where they don't have to write a narrative. Again, explaining what their next steps for learning are, and to increase students' engagement with the lesson for the entire class. Do you need to reteach any of the lesson content? Explain why or why not. If you were going to do this lesson again, what would you do the same or differently for the whole class and the 3 focus students? I'm going to point out something here where that's highlighted, the whole class and the 3 focus students. Wherever it says "and" in the guide, they have to include all of those aspects. So in this prompt, they need to talk about the entire class and focus student 1, focus students 2, and focus student 3. If it says "and" or, they can make a choice. But we see sometimes candidates, they'll either focus on maybe the 3 focus students, or they'll focus on the whole class and 1 or 2 of the focus students. That's not going, they have to focus on all 3. And then we have this last question that's new and sort of clarified from last year. But based on what the whole class of students learned about the content and the academic language you were teaching, what will you teach next? Again, they need to cite from steps 1, 2, and or 3. So let's go ahead and pause for questions about any of the step-by-step sections, steps 1, 2, 3, or 4. So we can, yes. So for that prompt, what are they thinking about next steps for learning for the entire class and all 3 of the focus students? So they need to comment on each one of those. That's part of the instruction for students, and just how to read the guide is, or for candidates, and how to read the guide is just really, understanding if it says "and," it means all of it. If it means "and" or, they can choose some of those factors to include. Okay, so we'll go through the rubrics a little bit. Let's go straight down to rubric 1.1. Sorry about, I live down the street from a fire station, so I get that a few times a day. In rubric 1.1, we have added one description here that the candidates in level 3, candidates lesson plan includes manageable, specific, and appropriate learning goals. So where the assessors will use their interpretation here if this seems like an appropriate learning goal for what the candidates have outlined in terms of the context for learning and for the students' backgrounds and their learning needs. And so this one is really focused on, does the candidates' proposed learning goals connect with students' prior knowledge? How do the proposed learning activities, instructional strategies, and grouping strategies support, engage, and challenge all the students to meet the learning goals? This rubric, the evidence for it can be found in all of those narratives, part A through D, that are outlined in step 1. And the assessors will look across all of those sources of evidence. So lesson 1, or rubric 1.2 is focused on how well, what did they do to support focus student 1, the English learner? So that idea of how does the candidate plan instruction using knowledge of focus student 1's assets and learning needs to support meaningful engagement with the content specific learning goals and the ELD goals. There was no additional language added to this one for this year. Rubric 1.3 is similar to rubric 1.2, but focuses on focus student 2. So again, the same question, how does the candidate plan instruction using knowledge of focus student 2's assets, learning needs, and the IEP 504 gate goals and plans to create a lesson that will support content-specific learning goals and ELD goals if appropriate. Okay. 1.4 is for focus student 3. And again, we have not made changes to these rubrics for this year. So how does the candidate plan instruction using their knowledge of focus student 3 and really supporting and engaging them in the learning? Okay. Now we move on to the teach and assess rubrics, 1.5. And they tie directly to those annotation titles. So the first one is, how did they create that positive, safe learning environment? How did they connect to prior learning? And how did they establish expectations for the learning? And we did no changes to this rubric either. Rubric 1.6 is focused on that second set of annotations, which is how the candidate engage the students in deep learning of content, monitor and informally assess their learning, and explain the next steps for content learning. That's that key piece here. So we've highlighted content learning wherever we could to draw candidates' attentions to that. I will say, if we can go back up here, I mentioned earlier that candidates often get a level 2 or a level 1 because level 3 is that expected level of performance. And that first construct is really focused on actively engage students in that deep learning and higher order thinking. We really want, that's the question for candidates is, what is that higher order thinking that the students are going to engage in around those learning verbs like analysis or synthesis. Okay. That is the last rubric for the teach and assess. We then move to the reflect rubric, which focuses on how does the candidate reflect on the impact of their asset and needs-based lesson, their planning, the teaching, and the informal assessment of student learning. And then reflecting on how effective the lesson was for the whole class and for the 3 focus students. We changed the instructional approach. That used to say the lesson or the lesson plan. It used to say candidates analysis of how effective their lesson planning was. We now talk about the instructional approach. And the last rubric, 1.8, is apply, and really thinking about how well did they apply what they have learned about the students' strengths and extend their understanding of content, higher order thinking, we added that in, and that academic language development, and then thinking about what are those next steps for instruction. So we highlighted the higher order thinking that has been added since previous versions. So with that, I think we will pause here. You know, Caroline is going to talk about condition codes in a moment. Brandy, if you go to the YouTube channel, it's on the CTC website. We will have it posted there. So CTC has its own YouTube channel, and we will post all those video clips or all the videos there. If you can't find it, I will again ask you. There we go. Thank you, Caroline.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if you have questions about anything you're trying to find, feel free to reach out to my email address. I try to get back to people as quickly as possible with that. Okay, so Caroline, do you want to go bring up the condition codes?
Yes. So, and I know there's been some questions about condition codes, so I'm guessing there will be a couple people chiming in after I'm done, but if you've done this before, you know that there are condition codes assigned to submissions when the candidate does not follow the directions accurately. They are all grouped into very specific categories. As you can see here, I'm not going to read through all of them, but this year a major push was to really clarify the condition codes and get to a place where we're oh, thank you, David, where we're really the mantra has always been score whenever possible, but we've looked at the condition codes this year to make sure to just clarify and refine things and make sure that candidates are getting scores whenever possible. Some specific changes this year, and I'm going to put this link in the chat in just 1 second, were just additional clarification around ELD and content standards. Zoltan, I don't know if you want to speak more to that while I put this into the chat.
Well, yeah, part of it was that we also had some duplicate condition codes around that, and so we streamlined them a little bit. So one of the things that you'll see is that if a candidate does not have their ELD or their content standards, every single rubric is affected by that, because all the planning rubrics are based on appropriate standards. The teach and assess are based on appropriate standards, as are the reflect and apply. So what you'll see, can we make that a little bit bigger, Caroline?
Yeah.
What you'll see is that for A89 is that it's about the current ELD standards, and ELD learning goals are not identified. And then A99 is that there's multiple codes going on as well. But A89 and A99 refer to the fact that there's multiple rubrics that are affected by that. We also we've sorted it out that the ELD standards are not used, or the learning goals are not identified. So sometimes you'll see candidates who will cite a standard, but they won't have a learning goal, or vice versa. So they might get, if they cite the standard, but they don't have a learning goals, they would get an A9. So Anna, they're slightly different, mostly streamlined. We had several here that were a little bit vague or redundant, so we took those out. Okay, I'll turn it back to you, Caroline.
I think we've got a question. What are the translation requirements? But I think unless there's anything specific you wanted me to speak on for the condition codes, I think those are the major pieces.
No, I think, again, if a candidate has a question about a condition code, they can get a clarification on that as well. But to know, the ones that we're getting mostly have to do with either content or ELD standards and learning goals. We're still getting several of those. They're either citing previous versions of standards, or they're not referencing the appropriate document. Here's one that we actually are getting as well. So for content standards, there are the California Common Core state standards, which is what they should be using. There's also the National Common Core, and we see candidates who are citing the National Common Core state standards, and they're slightly different. So they will get a condition code if they're not using the California Common Core state standards. The clarification process, I believe that's still the same. They should email ES, or evaluation systems, for clarity on what that condition code is. So if you go to the website, you'll be able to see the list of condition codes. Yep. Translation requirements are on page 37 of the multi-subject guide. And we also have on this website, there's also translation requirements as well. I believe it's under that submission requirements tab as well. Thank you, David. Really appreciate all the guidance. Okay. Other questions? Susie, the guidance for bilingual candidate, that has not been changed to my knowledge. And we're asking for the link to the rubric. So the rubrics are on the after the step-by-step in the program in the CalTPA Cycle 1 guide. Okay. There we go. And let's see if there's some more questions coming in. If I see any hands raised.
I did want to just point out yesterday in the APA deep dive, Gay pointed out that I think it's, sorry, give me 1 second. In the program guide, there's a helpful section with additional candidate supports. Zoltan, I don't know if you want to speak to how this is beneficial.
Yes.
Okay.
Again, so thank you for that. So really suggest bringing up the program guide. There's a lot of resources. We've added some additional resources this year. I think one of the things to really look at, I still do get from time to time mentors and programs who I think in previous versions of performance assessments, it was very limiting for programs on how much they could support candidates in this, in their work. But there's actually comprehensive supports that you have to provide and that are also optional for programs. So to look at what those supports are for candidates and to see how to bring that forward into your work with candidates. Again, teaching is a collaborative effort, and we really want programs and candidates to engage collaboratively around the design of this. So there are some things that you can't do. You can't, write it for them or direct or give them really direct feedback on what they should be doing, but that's all listed in the program guide. There are also some, I think I referenced the translanguaging section in here, which is also in here in terms of thinking about language diversity. There's also a section on funds of knowledge. That is a concept that's been around for a while, but not everybody is deeply immersed in the knowledge around that. So I think it provides some useful resources there. And also the piece for programs to look at what the remediation requirements are if a candidate either gets a condition code or does not pass an attempt. And I know programs will set their own policies in terms of the remediation that they are going to be able to do to support candidates, but it's also outlined here what the requirements for those are. Okay. Let's see, and for Shand, again, in the World Language Program Guide, it outlines exactly. I'm gonna double check that your question about whether all the narratives are in the target language, but It's also outlined in the World Language Guide, but I will double check and get that information back to you. There are no new condition codes. The ELD codes were from previous years. They're still the same codes. We've just sort of parsed them out so they're a little bit, they give candidates a little bit more information. Okay. So can we go back to the slide, Caroline?
Yeah.
And again,
Okay.
okay.
I was just seeing which slide you wanted me to show.
Well, I think if there are no further questions, we'll stay on for a bit if people have questions. But this has been, thank you for all the questions that have been coming in the chat. Very helpful. But if you have technical questions, again, the website at Pearson is there. I've put into the chat several times the policy questions. And I get lots of emails every day. I really appreciate folks reaching out with their questions in support of candidates. I hope it's helpful, but I also, it's invaluable to us in terms of thinking about what programs and candidates might need in terms of clarification. And then we also have that comprehensive website to refer to. You can actually really go down a rabbit hole on that website. There's a lot of resources there. Okay. And again, thank you so much for, this is, you're coming out of the last couple of years of pandemic. I always say this, I'm hopeful that things will be getting more back to normal than they were, but I think things have changed in education a little bit. And so we really appreciate all of your efforts in bringing our new generation of teachers into the field. Really important work and difficult work, but thank you all for your efforts there.
Thanks, everybody.
And we'll see some of you on Thursday for the new coordinators.
Friday? Oh, new coordinators.
New coordinators. So if you're a new coordinator and you want some nuts and bolts on what your requirements are for your job, please join us on Thursday. That's an extended one, I believe 9 till 3. And then we'll repeat this session for cycle 2 on Friday. And Susie, I see your hand up. Thank you.
Hi, yes, I just wanted to thank you for uploading those new submissions. I begged you to do that.
You did.
I'm glad you did. And I wanted to alert the other new folks or even returners that those new model TPA submissions are available and they're critical, but to maybe not use the old ones that are posted still, like the old science single subject cycle 2. The rubrics have changed so much, but those are still in there. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Susie. Actually, I was going to mention that and you beat me to it. Well, you reminded me, so thank you for that.
Yes, I'm very excited about it.
So that's under the secure materials tab. And here is the username and the password in the chat. We do ask you to really look at the requirements for security around those submissions and how they're handled and distributed to candidates. So please pay attention to that. I am actually currently, we've gotten a world language submission that I'm working on, and we're also developing some submissions, bilingual submissions as well. So that's going to be helpful. I think we've identified a few. It does take a while because they have to be ADA compliant, and that process takes a little bit. And again, if you ever need a password or need to find something on the website, just feel free to reach out. So Allison, the examples were updated end of sometime in beginning of July, I believe. There are 3 or 4 there. right, any final questions for the good of the order? All right, well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you later this week.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Oops, I should stop recording.